Today I would like to go over how the partials work in the MC-707. And they're a bit involved, but you can have lots of fun with them, simply editing your own sounds. So I brought you just one scene from a new song I'm working on at the moment, and I'm going to play that scene. Okay, but we're just interested in this last sound here. Now, I really like the sound. It is futuristic and it's really interesting, but I think I want to have more movement in that sound. And, well, movement is something where the LFOs are helpful in. So let's go into the sound menu of this tone. And here you see that we're in partial mode, so that we can edit each partial independently from the other ones. Okay, so I have nothing much done on the sound up till now. I gave it a little bit of delay, I gave it a little bit of reverb, and let's undo this panning here. Okay, so that's it. Right, and now you see we are on partial 4. So each partial corresponds to one of these oscillators here. But there's more to it than that. So the partial is a combination of the oscillator and its LFO, and it stores different kinds of settings. So let's go into partial number 1. And to do that, just press encoder number 1, and now you see we have changed from partial 4 to partial 1. And so you see in this partial we have the tape echo. Now if you change the effect here to a mid-side delay, let's say, and then you move the partial, you see that partial will have the same effect as well. So if we change that one back to tape echo, partial 1 will have tape echo as well. So not everything in this menu is stored within a partial. So if you have a tone made up of a number of oscillators, they can still only have one type of effect. So it does not allow you to have a different effect for each and every partial. So here we have an LFO, and this is the LFO in partial 1. So it's set to a sine wave, and cutoff and pitch, as well as amp and pan. Amp is just being the volume here, which can have a curve as well applied to it. They're all set to 0. So nothing much going on. Now for the sake of this argument, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off all the other partials. And let's see. Okay, so it's not spectacular if it's on its own, but it will enable us to hear much better how the LFO changes what we're going to listen to. So I'm going to play that sound, and I'm going to move the encoders a bit. Okay, so I hope you haven't left yet. So while it's extreme, it shows the amount of possibilities that we have. And so I like a slow LFO. Maybe it could even be slower. So right from the start, I like the movement aspect of it much better than before. Let's go deeply into that LFO. So I press enter, and now we're deep inside the LFO. So you see here, this page and the following ones are related to LFO number 1. And the reason is that I pressed enter on LFO 1. If I press enter here, you can see that we're in LFO 2. Not that I don't like LFO 2, but we are going to stay with 1. Right, so you see tempo sync is on because we set it on, and you can see that there is some sort of duplication here. So 1 bar of change, 1 bar of movement, and that is replicated here. So that's the same information that we have here as well. And then when we move on, we can see that the amplification curve or the amplification factor is changed and the panning factor is changed as well. And that again is something that we see here. So those are duplications, and I feel that this makes it a bit opaque because sometimes it's nice if one button does one thing, and if you set it once in one place, you do not have to worry about something being there in other places as well. Okay, let's move on, and we go to the rate. And I'm not going to play around with the pitch because it just sounds awful. Let's change the filter depth here. Okay, right. Extreme values give you extreme results. That should not be a surprise. I think that's just too extreme for me, because the sound actually does cut off there, but it might be different for you. Now we have changed oscillator 1, partial 1. Okay, and what we could do now is we could go into the partial 2 mode, and we could see what we can do here. So this partial works differently. In partial 1, we changed the cutoff value, the amp value, the sync value. When we go on, move on to partial 2, none of these are set. And what might be interesting is to turn sync on, but then not sync it on the same value that we have for LFO1, which is 1 bar. So we can use a shorter measure here, and maybe like that, and then we can have the 2 LFOs work sort of against each other, clash and mesh into each other. So if we change the value here maybe to a dotted quarter note, then we have a lot of variation between partial 1 and partial 2 because they move at different rates, thus producing different results. So you see, having both partials on at the same time and setting different values for the sync rate here, dotted quarter note versus a whole bar, then you really get a lot of movement in between these partials here. Moving on to oscillator 3 and partial 3, with that the same principles align. I think that is really helpful to understand more fully how this menu system works, that you can click through the partials and then set the corresponding values. So the takeaway is here that an oscillator corresponds to a partial, and we can turn oscillators on and off. But as a partial is more than just an oscillator, there are more values than simply the oscillator values connected to that partial. So for example, you can have EQ settings partial 1 and partial 2 can have a different EQ, right? And in the same vein, each partial has 2 LFOs, and these can have different values. Though some values are shared, so for example, you can have only one effect for all 4 partials. So you can't have different effects for each and every partial, which is just a restriction from the processing power point of view, right? That was number 1. Each partial can have different values. And the other takeaway is that if you change LFO values for the different partials, then you can get a more in-depth look at what you're doing there. If you simply press enter on the LFO, and then you're taken to the partial menu. If you go into the depth of this menu system, then what you see here is that the 4 partials are numbered on lines following one another. So partial 1 is on the first line, partial 2 on the next, and so on and so forth. And you see that partial 4 is not activated here. This menu looks more complicated than it actually is, because it's a super menu for 4 partials at the same time. So that concludes the small insights into the partial menu system of the MC-707, and I just hope you found that interesting or maybe helpful. So please, if you have any thoughts on these mini tutorials or these mini clips that I do, just write a comment and tell me what I could change, what I could make better. Anything's really helpful. Have a great day, and see you soon.